Hello, class. Today we're talking about children's book illustration, and we're going to do a overall historic look at children's illustration in the Americas. Although I am touching on a couple folks that are English because of their popularity, or of German descent also. But we're going to start with Palmer Cox, who's from Canada to the north, and he did work in the New York region. However, he's most famous for creating these little guys called the brownies. And the brownies are little fairy folk that basically get into all kinds of trouble and have all kinds of schemes. They're rather individual. Each of them has a different hat. They also have the capability of parodies of immigrant groups. He had some that were dressed up with Chinese garb or top hat and monocle, just very strange little guys. They were very popular. Multiple books were published, and these were, in a sense, starting out for adults because they ended up in satirical type magazines. But the popularity of them also led over to children's interests. And Palmer Cox, he died in 1924. Beatrix Potter, perhaps one of the most famous, with a obvious children's focus. She had a career which started out as a scientific illustrator. She wasn't technically a professional illustrator in the old sense of the word. She was a woman in a man's world at the time. It's very tough for a woman to be self-employed, but she did do work for scientific publications, doing things like fossils and zoological study. But she had also a crazy menagerie of pets, of real, like, mice from the yard and rabbits and hedgehogs, and she drew them a lot and created these wonderful characters such as Peter Rabbit, who I'm sure everybody knows. Her books were also unique in that they were children's size. They were very small, roughly 5 by 5 inches, small enough to fit into a child's hands and be turned comfortably. It's not one of these big books that would sit in the lap and weight down the knees. She was specifically focused on the kids from the beginning to the end. I'm putting N.C. Wyeth from the Brandywine School here. Now, Brandywine is in the Pennsylvania Brandywine Valley, and he basically focused on some real classics, mainly dealing with the Old West, King Arthur and various knights, Robinson Crusoe, and here we have Treasure Island from 1911. They were stories that kids could enjoy, although I doubt they were read by smaller children. The pictures and illustrations were just gorgeously painted, and here is a large oil painting. His pieces were huge. They can top 8 feet in vertical, but just wonderful works from this person who's considered the father of American illustration, if not, part of that hierarchy. Winsor McCay, whose work, Little Nemo's Adventures in Slumberland, were seen in the newspapers. However, I put them in with the children's illustration because they did deal mainly with Little Nemo, and he would generally have these crazy dreams at night and wake up on the floor in a pile of blankets. But kids just loved, reading the funnies. So I'd like to include some of these earlier major influences. Little Nemo went on to influence a lot of the next generation of illustrators, such as Maurice Sendak and Edward Gorey and so on. But these pieces were just really well rendered, classically studied. The pages are broke up with a sophistication that you'll see now in modern cartoons, but this really set the stage. Rose ONeill, who was a classical illustrator, also doing work for the major magazines. But she was a cartoonist for Puck magazine. And she developed these little characters called the Kewpie dolls. And they actually went on to become little three-dimensional dolls that people held and are currently collected. But 1912, these are Kewpie dolls on a tree, Christmas tree. Also, very, very interesting is that she studied sculpture under Auguste Rodin, who happened to be the Frenchman who, if you remember, the thinker, or the just wonderful massive sculptures. Here we have The Cat in the Hat by Dr. Seuss, who was actually named Theodore Geisel. And Dr. Seuss, prior to being Dr. Seuss, was Theodore Geisel, and he did illustrations for books like And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. He was well known for World War II propaganda and political cartoons. He won the Legion of Merit and some Academy Awards, actually, for his work. Another one, I think it was Gerald McOinboing. I think that was his Academy Award for that. Hardy Gramatke, one of my favorites. His watercolors are exquisite. They're just really fresh. You see his washes. He was a very famous watercolorist for the part of the California Watercolor Society when he was seen by the Disney, and he became a senior animator at Walt Disney Studios, who then in succession animated Little Toot, which was Gramatke's piece that he did in 1939. And Little Toot went on to have many more adventures. And Gramatke's work as a watercolorist was seen in the Whitney Museum, Metropolitan Museum of Art. He was a member of a number of different societies. This is Kurt Weezy, who is close to my heart because my father actually posed for some of Weezy's children's books as just like a little neighborhood kid in frumpy clothes. But Kurt was born in Germany and moved to China and was actually captured by the Japanese in World War I and sent to an Australian POW camp. But he did some beautiful works. Perhaps one of his most famous was The Five Chinese Brothers. He won Caldecott and Newbery Awards. But this is a piece called Happy Easter. And you can see his handling of natural forms and objects. These chicks and rabbit just look so alive. And the way that the line is handled is just so fresh. Beautiful contour lines and great negative space around that whole rabbit and chick form. Crockett Johnson, one of my favorites, did Harold in the Purple Crayon in 1955, and it's very simple and graphic, but it's masterfully handled. Crockett Johnson, his real name was not Crockett Johnson, but David Leask, and I guess nobody could pronounce that, so he took his childhood nickname, which was Crockett, and just threw Johnson, which was his middle name, on there, so Crockett Johnson. And he also did cartoons. Barnaby, I guess, was one of his more famous cartoons. But Harold went on beyond this and became a little bit of a series. And just is a gorgeous little piece. Another one of my favorites, which is Robert Patterson. You won't see a lot of Robert's work out there, but his work is very much a part of the 50s and early 60s, and a style of illustration that you'll see across the board in Women's Day magazine or many of the advertisements. It's very clean, very very much Americana in a sense. And this was one of my favorite books as a child. It's called You Will Go to the Moon, and it's before anybody ever went to the moon, and they were still actually building up the space program. It's 1959, but it totally engulfed me. And these are pen and ink, and they are shaded watercolor and gouache. And we jump over to one of the most famous of American illustrators, and that's Maurice Sendak. And this is Where the Wild Things Are, which he developed in 1963, although he did already have a career going with other children's books, such as In the Night Kitchen, Little Bear series, Outside Over There. His work is broad and broadly recognized as genius. On the darker side, there's Edward Gorey, and this is one of the pages from the Gashly Crumb Tinies. Let me get that out again. Gashly Crumb Tinies, and or After the Outing. And this was done in 1963, and it's a real dark little story. It's an ABC book, but this is the Z, which is Z is for Zilla, who drank too much gin. And it's basically a story about little children and how they died. It's kind of sick. But you'll recognize his work on the beginning of PBS Mysteries. His characters are there in the Gothic opening, playing croquet and being struck by lightning and so on. Eric Carle, he's a German-born illustrator who happened to go through the war, rough time there, and he came to New York. And here is one of his pieces, The Hungry Caterpillar. Eric's work, if you notice, is kind of pieced together, and that's exactly because he pieces his work together. It's made with a collage. He hand paints paper, and then cuts out shapes of that hand-painted paper, and then puts them together. And there's a brown bear, what do you see? 1, 2, 3 at the zoo, and of course this one, The Hungry Caterpillar. And it's all cut paper, but it's all paper that Eric has painted. So it's not as if it's magazine pieces or pieces of photographs. Getting a little closer in time zone to now, which is Jeffrey Kinney, born in 1971, and here's his Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Really fun stuff, and these are probably for an older age group, but just the fact that his illustrations are highlighted throughout the books, mad popularity. And they kind of remind me of Matt Groening's work in Life in Hell. If you're aware of those from the city newspapers. But this also went on to become a movie, or a number of movies, I think. And again, one of my favorites of the modern era, and that's Judy Schecter. And this is Skippy John Jones, who's a Siamese cat that pretends that he's a Chihuahua, and he has all kinds of adventures. And this was done in 2003, but I'm sure we can see more Skippy John Jones in the future. So, what is children's book illustration? Well, children's book illustration is focused on a broad age group, from picture books, which have no words whatsoever, to preteen readers, such as I would consider the Diary of a Wimpy Kid a preteen reader, which is more text-heavy but augmented with illustration. Children's books are labor-intensive. They have multiple stages, from sketch through what is a mock-up, through tight preliminary drawings, and then revisions of those preliminaries, and then you go to final. You're at it for a long time, and it's page after page, multiple spreads that you're concerned with. So it is very labor intensive, and it's a big commitment. a year or more of your life should be devoted to getting one book done. They have a long shelf life. The minute they're purchased, they generally stay in someone's collection in the bookshelf, or they're handed down. So they can become icons. And like people like Crockett Johnson or Eric Carle, you can have a series. The Brownies. I mean, there was a number of Brownies books by Palmer Cox. There were a number of Cat in the Hat books. There were a number of books with Little Toot. So they become these series that, in a sense, become the product and legacy of the illustrator. They, fourthly, can be executed in all mediums. Now, we saw pieces there that were done in pen and ink. There's pieces that were done in oil paint. There are pieces that are done in watercolor, charcoal. There are digital pieces that we saw. I believe that some of these are faceted in their approach. We have Judy Schecter, I believe, is using everything from charcoal to digital enhancement. So does not matter how you get it done, just get it done. They are generally commissioned by book companies, book agents, or they're self-initiated. Generally, if you're approached by an author to do a book, it's not a very popular author. Don't do it. Generally speaking, you're not going to get paid. You're going to put in a lot of effort, and these guys are saying, oh, you'll become famous later. Well, no. Generally, this work is commissioned by book companies, by agents, or the illustrator themselves will self-initiate. So don't be sucked in by somebody who writes a story, okay? As an illustrator, you're not going to get much out of it. So likewise, let's just jump to the last one, which is they can be very low paying to high paying. So depending on the book success. You can strike a deal when you get your name out there and you have a preliminary success, a previous success. However, if you're right off the boat and or the potato truck, you're going to get the basic deal, which is a living wage, but you're not going to be raking in the dough. So you will generally, if it sells well, you'll be getting a check every quarter or a half year. I get a check in various sizes from previous work I've done. I'm not necessarily, buying a new car with that money, but, I am paying a bill or two. So be aware that these can be low and high paying. So it depends on your passion and depends on what you feel and what you want to get out of it as an illustrator. That is it for children's book illustration. I am going to be covering the actual process of creating a children's book in a future lecture. And that will be towards the end of the semester during our final project. So here it is, folks. Thank you.